is Sonam, and I am so happy to welcome all of you to our digital platform hosted by Bhutan Echoes Drukyul's Literature Festival. Under the patronage of Her Majesty Gyalum Doji Wangmo Wangchuk, Bhutan Echoes Drukyul's Literature Festival is the revamped version of Mountain Echoes, a festival of literature, art, and culture held annually in Thimphu. His Majesty the King, Drukyul, granted the new name. The festival for the past 10 years has been an inclusive space for diverse ideas from Bhutan and outside. The festival was produced by an Indian producer, Sihai, Adia Mita Kapoor, Namita Gokhale, and Pramod Kumar, KG, for the past 10 years. However, starting in 2020, the baton was passed on to a Bhutanese team, but with the same spirit of Bhutan-Indo friendship on which it was founded. Last year, because of COVID, we were unable to host our annual festival, but we were able to launch our new name, our new logo with our patrons' blessing. We also were able to publish a book, Hloi Chojung, originally written by the 10th J. Kempo Benchen Tenzin Chogyal and translated into Dzongkha by Lebe Rinchen User. Under our outreach program, we've partnered with Vitob to promote the 10-page reading series. We've also started something called Storytelling and Inheritance, a collaboration with Folk Heritage Museum. And we've gone digital. We've published the lockdown series, and overall we are strengthening our digital presence. Today we are hosting our very first series called Drukyul's Digital Salon with Bhutan's most prolific and internationally acclaimed writer, Kunzang Choden. Kunzang, very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I think before we begin, I'd just really like to go into Kunzang's illustrative career in publishing and writing. Kunzang first, I think, started writing or first published a book of collection of folktales of Bhutan, and then went on to write a series of books such as Dawa, the story of a stray dog in Bhutan, Circle of Karma, Chili and Cheese, Food and Society in Bhutan, and a number of children's books. Kunzang is also has also written non-fiction articles and established the Riyang Press. Kunzang, I think the first question that I'd like to start with is, and it's a very basic question, but could you please tell us what was the impetus for you to get started with writing? Was there some objective, or was it sort of just a natural exploration of your voice?
Leslie, thank you so much. Actually, I think I always liked reading and writing. So even in school, I enjoyed essays, stories, and things like this. And later in life, after I had my two children, we were living at that time in the United States, and my children who are both born in Bhutan had a beginning of knowing who they were, where they were, what their culture was, and everything. We were suddenly shifted to the United States, and then there was a period when they were really confused, and they felt the peer pressure to conform, and often they asked, "Who are we? Are we Americans? Are we like everybody else?" And that was the time when I felt that, how quickly children can change their ideas, their outlook, their perspectives, and everything. And I felt that I was failing as a mother because I was not passing on my inheritance. So what I did was I started telling them stories that I had heard in my childhood. but they were growing up so fast. And every day there was so much stimulus from outside to, hear the stories on television, read the books in school and things like this. So I decided to write the stories I had heard in my own childhood, growing up in Ugunchilling, for them. No, and then I was working on it, and then it's always a battle between the mainstream and what mother was trying to tell them. So I worked on it harder and harder. And by the time that they were able to read the book on their own, it had grown into quite a collection. And because I'd worked on it, it was quite, I had put in a lot of work. And then I had it as a journal, all handwritten. And then later on, I decided, I've made this collection. I'm sure there are a lot of other children, many children like us, caught up with different cultures, the globalization. And I said, maybe I should try and get it published. And at that time, we were living in Laos. We had already come back and we were living in Laos. And the obvious place to look for a publisher was Thailand. That's why my first book was published, White Lotus, in Thailand. And I was very fortunate. I guess he was just curious about Bhutan. It was not the work that was excellent or anything like this, but it was just because there had been no publications from Bhutan. So the publisher wanted to take the risk, as he put it, you're a risk, but I'll do it. So, and I had quite a favorable response, especially in Bhutan. People, Bhutanese young people were saying, I know this story from my grandmother and things like this. And I felt there was really a need for young children to listen to the stories or read the stories, because they were now no longer listening but reading. And it was mainly the response from the Bhutanese readers as well as the international response to folk tales from Bhutan. I think there were a lot of books on folk tales from Tibet, Nepal, everywhere, but there was nothing from Bhutan. So there was a big response, and I felt that there was a need, and it was kind of a duty as a person who came from an oral society. If I took all the stories orally and died with it, like there were so many elders who were dying with the stories, having ever been heard beyond their family. So that really encouraged me to work on Bhutan-based stories, our own narratives.
Yes, and I think, Kunzang, you are the first Bhutanese writer to be published in English, Nula. Is that correct, La?
I think so. Because I think there was a lot of work coming in among the Bhutanese writers in Dzongkha, and there were people who were writing English. But our problem was because there was not a culture of publishing. So most of these, whatever books came out, were being self-published. And I think for me, the physical isolation of being in Laos at the time gave me the opportunity to try in Thailand. And that's what started. I think there were other writers who were writing, but not having the access to have a professional intervention of layout, editing. I mean, there was also a good editor I had, and all the process of the actual publishing, most of them were self-publishing. And at the time I was doing my books, I think what people were saying is we can get a briefcase publisher, means he or she would take all the manuscript and it had to be photo ready, means everything had to be done and they were just printed. So they were basically printers. So I think that was my good fortune, that I was in a place that I was compelled to look. And I also knew nothing about publishing.
Yes.
But I bought a book called All About Publishing. So I went step by step. Now you do this, now you do that. So I was kind of self-taught, and I just jumped into the unknown, uncharted seas, and I was fortunate.
Yes.
I think Bhutan, the name Bhutan gave it a lot of weight, because there was a lot of interest around the time in the 1990s Bhutan was opening up, and a lot of people who were interested in Bhutan.
So I think this is such a wonderful story because books have appealed to not only an international audience but also a local audience. So both audiences. And I think it's a great story as well as learning story in that if you don't know, you can learn. No, and as you're telling us a story about teaching yourself how to publish, and using your space, your sense of where you were to basically connect and explore. So that's, I think, a wonderful lesson for us young folks to learn. I would like to, I think, go deeper into your background because, what I've noticed and what I find so beautiful, which you've expressed already, is this sense of wanting to connect a younger generation to the tradition, to the history of Bhutan. And I think specifically for I think you have such a rich history and such a rich background I'd like to share with the audience. In this article that you wrote, and this was a Loser article, which I loved so much. I'll just read a little bit. This is about background. My father's ancestors traced their religious lineage to the 14th century Tibetan master Longchen Rabjampa, and the genealogical lineage to the saint and tantric treasure discover Doji Lingpa. Then you go on to really describe Loser in the Oginchuling Palace, which was just incredible and really beautiful for, I think, for someone like me, who, very much, I think you would call us one of sort of very similar to sort of your children's experience, which is to be displaced a little bit because of our education, gone abroad, but to read how beautifully you express that tradition. I think it's a feeling that it's hard to describe, but I feel that sense of connection. And I again want to read again a passage, if you'll allow me. And this is about Loser. These special occasion plates, I think I love how you describe very much in detail just all of the I would say paraphernalia, the objects, the feeling of what it is like to be there at Loser. The special occasion plate called tokhe were made of silver, brass, copper, or even wood. It was a challenging artistic and a loving endeavor to balance all the food on top of each other to heights of about 30 centimeters off the plate. The end result was a conical structure of food that looks like a free-floating lotus bud. By observing this ceremony, our family was following a 300-year-old tradition. So I think a question, I think in part which you've already answered, is do your traditions, your history and background inform your writing?
Oh, I think certainly. I think, in fact, my first book, the collection of folk tales, came from the stories I had heard. And it had a big impact on the way I was, how I lived my life. In fact, when I was sent to school in Kalimpong without any preparation, I would just go. I was 9 years old. We were not even told. We were not prepared as to where we were being sent. No, so I was sent into this convent school, not speaking a word of Nepali, Bengali, Hindi, or any English. So I was actually put into this boarding school. I'm sure this is a very common experience for my generation of people. We couldn't speak. We couldn't communicate at all. So we went to the classes like very robotic. We just walked, not understanding, not comprehending anything. And the only thing that kept me connected to who I was by trying to remember the stories I had heard in my childhood and telling these stories to myself when I was alone in bed. And that kept me connected somehow. I was not completely alienated. I was not completely isolated. I really knew where I'd come from, what my reality was. I could that at that stage I couldn't analyze all these things, but this was what was happening, I guess. And it was only about after 6 months of being in the school that I could actually talk with the staff, not teachers and not the nuns, but the staff, because they would talk in Nepali, and somehow that sort of connected me to them. But this was very important for me, and that was the main reason, I think, that when my children were losing their how do you say, their ground, and they were losing their culture and the history and everything, that was what I turned to, the stories that I had heard. So I think where you come from, your history and everything has a big impact. And even now, um, I write with that. I draw from my main resource is my history, my cultural background, my geographical background. And even as I write the children's stories these days, my children's stories, it's always based on something that I know from the oral tradition, something of a place that I know as an important place for the locality in my religious or historical belief or anything like this. And of all the lores, of all the stories I heard, I try to bring them in because I feel, because each of us has a story to tell and each of our experiences are different. And I think if we can express it in a way as in the form of a story, or people do it in art, or everything, I think this is the way of giving back to the next generation what we have inherited. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes, completely makes sense. And
Okay.
and I think also what I noted in your some of your articles was this connection to the larger sort of cultural setting and culture, the history of Bhutan. And if I may, I'm going to share a paragraph with our viewers. In the same article about Loser, Kunzang, you write about the connection of Loser with the country and how it started, which I thought was so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I want to share it here. This ceremony, performed all over Bhutan, originated in 1637. The great Jabdrung Nawang Namgyal, 1594 to 1651, the unifier of Bhutan, conducted an inaugural ceremony. People from all over the country came for the celebrations, bringing with them produce from their regions. Rice and other cereals, as well as different varieties of fruits and vegetables, came from the nearby valleys of Shar. And then you go on to explain sort of all the products, different products coming from different regions. And then you say, the Jabdrung considered this gesture of people coming from all over the country with their regional produce as highly auspicious, and asked the people to be seated in rows, and every food item was served to all. This momentous event, known as Shudrel Pinsum Tokpa, which literally means coming together and seating in rows for all good things, has become a standard ceremony for important occasion like the New Year, wedding, and house inauguration. When I read this, it was so powerful for me because I didn't know this, and to actually now see the connection, or which you've so beautifully put here, with how we celebrate our wedding ceremonies and our loser, and how it came about. I think it was just a wonderful piece of information. So thank you for that. In that same article, I just want to go on talking about, there's also what comes to the forefront is your love for Tung, the valley Tung in Bumthang, where you're from originally. And I think if you could please talk to us a little bit about maybe the Tung Valley and how it influences your writing, or so how, I think readers would be really curious about sort of how you grew up there.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much. I think just to interject a little bit where you talked about the Shudel Prinsum Sokpala. I think actually it happened recently we had the Juniper Losar Nola. Juniper Losar, which some people say Shatchapa Losar and things like this. It's actually the day of offering, and the Shudel Prinsum Sokpa actually happened during this time, I think. But it was then transferred to make it the Tangba Losar, which is the National Losar Day, which is coming in February. So that's how it was. And actually, I took the reference from a history book, which is actually taught in the schools. Yes. So I think the people who have had access or who were taught from that book would know about it. But I think what is important is to relate it to your life. And I think we fail to do that. We learn it, we study for it, for exams, but we don't relate it to our lives. So this day of offering, which is the Juniper Losar, actually happened there. And now it has been made kind of the ceremony for any auspicious gathering, not as I said, for weddings and housewarming and things like this. Okay, so each time we celebrated and did the Shud Day, actually, we should be thinking about the most important historical fact of, Bhutan becoming unified under this great visionary leader, religious master, Shabtung Au Namgyal. Yes. So to address the specific question about how I grew up in Tang Valley, I mean, Tang Valley is one of the 4 valleys of Bhutan. These days, one of the most annoying things, which also is perpetuated by our guides, tourist guides, is they think Bhutan is Chokor, just one valley, and everything else is not Bhutan. So I always have to tell everybody, look, Bhutan has 4 valleys, and Tang is one of the valleys of Bhutan. Bhutan is the whole area. Bhutan is not Jakar or Jamkar. It's the 4 valleys. Okay, so each valley has stories of their origin, how they came to be named, how what kind of The amazing thing is within the small space, there's so much history and culture associated with each valley. And Tang Valley has a very interesting story about how in the 8th century, when Guru Rinpoche abandoned this demon king, Tikharatho, the king with the mouth of a dog and the head of a goat, he abandoned him because he was kind of seen as a demon king, so he was abandoned in a wooden aeroplane. That's the 8th century, okay? So they were living somewhere in the northern borders of Bhutan towards Tibet. And because he was seen as a forebringer of evil and, catastrophes and everything that was bad for the country, he was abandoned. And the aeroplane flew, and one of the nicest stories, there are many stories, but one of the nicest stories is that this wooden plane flew south into Bhutan, and when it reached Tang, it cracked up with the sound Tang. So our valley called Tang is the sound of the wooden aeroplane breaking. Okay, of course there are other stories about how this happened, but Tang Valley is even today, one of the valleys, you've been there yourself, which is still quite untouched by modernization. Until recently, we only had a dirt road. We had electricity quite late, and of course the connection changes at all, but it's still an agricultural valley. People still live very traditionally. And during the time when I was growing up, thinking about it now, I mean, we were completely isolated. Okay, so there was, because we were isolated, there was no radio, in fact, we had one radio which we used to listen to in our childhood, which was more, this wiring and whizzing and fuzzing and things like this. We could hardly hear anything. but that was the sign of modernization. There was one sewing machine, and so that's how quiet, unaffected we were. And it was mostly, how do you say, the temples in each village. There are quite a few villages, and each temple around which the villages grew around. And that's exactly what Uginchuling happened also. Uginchuling um, happened there with religious personalities coming, and then the village people, the patrons coming and living around. And there were no schools. So I grew up with my brothers in a homeschool, kind of a homeschool tutorial. I was the only girl, and we learned our alphabet in the traditional Bhutanese way, with a lot of discipline, with a lot of physical interventions. And by the beginning of 1962, I was chosen under the new education policy to have everyone educated. So I was the first girl. Of course, I was the one that got the opportunity to travel to India. Before that, we just learned things by doing. And the most important thing was that we spent a lot of time telling and listening to stories. So that's what was the most important thing. And during holidays, which was usually not Sundays, but usually the holy days, okay? So like 8th, 15th, and 30th, we would go on pilgrimages, and then we would learn our history through visiting these places. Okay, so there was a lot of this was the life we knew. There were no toys, and even though I came from a privileged family, I grew up like everybody else. We didn't have a luxury of so much materials, and we ate the same foods. We kind of ate the seasonal, and that's what I stressed in my article on Los Ala. Sorry. About the seasonality. So it kept us very close, that you couldn't get everything every time. You couldn't get out of things. So you begin to respect the seasons. No, you knew that you would get oranges only towards the winter, that you would, you would have to preserve, you had to, and I think this was very, very important. And for me, even today, I feel that we should know the connection between what we eat, what we have, with how it's produced, how it, and how it's brought in front of us, and how we are so fortunate to be able to have all this, and the impact and the consequences that we leave behind. The carbon footprint. Everybody's talking about this. These things were, as if we understood, and we were grateful. The sense of gratitude for what you have is now lost. And I try in my article on the Lhasa to tell us how much trouble people took so that you could have one mouthful of a small piece of banana or something like this. The gratitude, and we would eat. We would not eat or partake of anything till we thanked our Kunchusum. And even when we got the first fruit in the season, we would say, offerings. May I live until the next season. So you were grateful for because mortality was so high, that the season that you go along with the seasons was so important. So all this I try to bring out in my article.
So, Ankuta, I certainly see this strong connection to the land, as you've described it in your article, but also in your other books and other articles that you've written. But also what I've noted is this strong connection to what is not seen. What I mean by that are the spirits and our teachers, and I think time and time again I see that coming through your different novels. Could you speak a little about that spiritual connection?
Leslam, I think well, now of course young people begin to look on these things as old grandma's tales and things like this. But for us, we grew up in a environment that we respected the environment. We were always aware of the fact that we were not the only uh, living beings on earth. There was the gods above, Ha, Namkhalha, and Banasa. Sorry, on the middle land, that human beings were there, but we were on kind of borrowed space with the Zen, because they were the original inhabitants. So there were spirits all around, and of course, Okchulu, the Nagas and the subterranean beings there. And we were always conscious of these spirits being there, and they were called the Nepos. No, the Nepos is the host, and we were like the guests. So I mean, guests have to behave in a certain way. So even now you can see that when people are doing the plowing for the first time, they just don't go and plow. Even if they're plowing with a tractor, they still make an offering to the spirits living around to say, please protect our fields, make sure that we have adequate rain and sunshine and things like this. And it'll be thanks to you that if we have an abundant harvest. And that you can still see it being done by the people, and I feel really gratified, and I wonder for how long this will continue, Nola. And even desecration of our environment. I mean, you didn't burn indiscriminately because you would be polluting the high in the skies. You wouldn't be cutting trees indiscriminately because under the trees were living beings, things like this. Now, I'm talking about not the exactly religious as understood under Buddhism, but they were spirits that were there protecting the environment. And even now, everything goes to the river, into the lake, and into pools of water. We throw everything there, out of sight, out of mind. But that was not there. We were always mindful of what we were throwing. Of course, that time there were not so much pollutants to be thrown away also, but mostly organic. But even then, we wouldn't throw away things because we didn't want to destroy the habitats of the people, of the spirits that were living in the lakes and the subterranean beings. In fact, that has such an impact on me that what scientists now are saying about destroying our environment, I think if we had followed the norms, the traditional norms of the spirituality of the world, we would not have come into this situation. First of all, we would follow some of our values of the virtues of having enough, not always wanting the greed, the compassion, and also not respecting the environment. I think we would. Now it's impossible, almost impossible that we try even in our today's lives how to be conservative and not use everything that's available. But even then, at the end of the week, how much garbage we generate, and all that had to be thrown away. And all this, I don't know how you might say it's quite a strange thing that I'm trying to connect our modern lives with the spiritual. But I think people like us who grew up with that, we are much more conscious because of the way we were brought up with the spirits. Yes. Of course. And in fact, my next children's book, which is now at the printers, is about it's such a story, because I think children need to learn also. It's about a subterranean being, Ashitsomen, the mermaid princess. So it's talking about our beliefs about how not polluting and just disregarding everything just for our sakes. That, of course, being there, I'm not going to be able to talk about the Buddhist spirituality. This is just the spirits that folk people believed beyond the traditional written, the Buddhism as the high Buddhism, okay, and the way we live with the spirits. And of course, there's also one of the big things that we lived with was the spirits that were not so benevolent. They were the malevolent spirits, and we had a lot of them. That was, of course, flourishing because at the time there was no medical interventions. Okay, we had no medical care. So anytime you got a headache, you knew which spirit was harming you. If you had a stomachache, which knew. So I did a paper, and I think I identified about more than 15 spirits, malevolent spirits in the valley. And even with hospitals now and free care and the best medical care that we can have, people still consult these spirits. No, if I say I'm not feeling well today, they say, "Oh, let me do some fumigation." I'm sure your symptoms sound like the spirit from here. Let me burn, and I know exactly what they like to eat. So burn some champa and some sugar and some beef and things like that. So we are still living with this. We have the Buddhist deities, the Bodhisattvas and Buddhas up there. Then we have the other spirits, and then what it seeps down to our lives, how it influences. Any time of the day you can go into a village of, like for instance, into the house of a village of 21 households, and you'll find somebody doing some kind of appeasement, obligatory rites for the spirits, the malevolent spirits, of course. There are different levels of spirits. Of course, the Buddhist deities and the Buddhist bodhisattvas and all the ones in the temple, we know are spiritual worship, the high culture. And then I said at the folk level, at the village level, at the community level, we have a lot of other spirits which are guarding this mountain, guarding that river, guarding this tree. And they are the malevolent spirits also that are always harming us because of some things that we do. And often when they do the divination, they find you have cut down a tree here and you have to replace the tree. Now, isn't that a wonderful thing to keep the environment? So I said we live with different levels of the spiritual world. And that's the reality in many of the villages in Bumtang in town for sure, but I think also in many different parts of Bhutan.
So now I think we'll just talk a little bit about children's books, because you did mention that, and it seems that Kunzang, you're really diving into that, or you have been over the past few years. Is that a conscious decision to start writing children's books, Solo?
Definitely, it was really a very something that I believe very strongly, having taught in schools and having been quite associated with reading and libraries for as long as I was in Thimphu. I was with a group of people whom we called ourselves the Friends of the Library, and we used to go every Saturday, and we found what was the sad reality was that everything in Thimphu has changed. Thimphu, I remember when they first came in 1966, was just a row of one-star shops all along the Northern Lam. And everything has grown and boomed, and, everything has changed except the library. Mm. And that was a big shock for us. There was Ampek, who was also one of the directors of the Mountain Echoes at that time. Then two of us and a few friends of ours, we got together and we said, this is really a pity that everything has grown and developed and evolved, and the library has remained the same since its inception in the 1970s. And we found out that there was a system of having memberships in the library the memberships had gone down to, I think, a 2-digit figure. And nobody was really reading. Nobody took it seriously. So it was just a space it occupied, and the librarians were there. And we said, we have to do something. So we started this weekly programs there of reading with the children, reading for the children, and making kind of a living space in the library. Then I realized that there were hardly any books. The children were reading, would know Cinderella and Puss in the Boots, and Choto Bhim and all these characters and books they would know, but they didn't know anything about our folk stories, our folk characters. And that really had a big impact on me. And I was really thinking of how to get our folk stories illustrated, because at that time, the kind of children we were working with were mostly, they were much more interested in the pictures, the visuals, rather than reading. So make the text small, very limited text, and have beautiful illustrations of Bhutanese character, Bhutanese scenes, Bhutanese context, put it in a Bhutanese context. So I started with I think my first book was with Auntie Mouse. In Bumtangka, it's called Aminiwa, which is a very well-known story, in at the time when I was a child growing up, and how it appealed to the children reading it. And I think, so I really worked myself and taught myself. I'm still teaching myself. I still haven't got the best combination. I've never been to writing classes or anything like this. I just learn from other books, children's books. And so it was a very conscious story and conscious effort, in fact, and to build up. And I really enjoy what I realized, that writing for children is quite difficult, because you want to give them the best. You don't want to just throw in any words or any sentences or any context like that. You have to do it mindfully with a lot of love for the children. And I was quite shocked when I was printing one of my books. Uh, the printer was saying, it's okay, give them the cheapest paper. It's after all for schools. And that really hurt me, because that's the kind of attitude that people had. It's just for the books. The government will buy it anyhow, and that really shocked me. And I really felt that we had to get the best. And I work on my children's stories quite over a long period, reading it, thinking about it, comparing it. So it's really, I think we need to do that more. And what upsets me also, well, it doesn't upset me. I mean, it's not the most important thing. But what shocks me, I guess, is when people come and say, how much money are you making? It's really not. My book publishing is a money sinking project. It's not a money making project. But I enjoy it, and I will continue doing that. And I always try to bring in, like in Dawa, for instance, which fortunately or luckily has become now a textbook. I try to bring in, beside Dawa itself, Dawa himself, a lot of cultural and historical stories, like the events, the different passes that we have to cross, and even a little bit of our stigmas that we have, who is allowed to do, who is okay to do this kind of work and who should not be touching a dead dog, for instance. I try to bring a little of a societal prejudice so that children open up, the readers open up and see what really it is. So I always try to base on the existing conditions as well as historical and our social beliefs into the stories.
Yes, Lan. So I definitely noted your want and desire and your exploration of sort of society's ills through, the book, The Circle of Karma, which was hugely popular internationally as well as Dawa. I think I very much noted, I noted that it was about a dog, but it was more than that. It was definitely an observation, a look, and a critique, if you will, of some of our society's ills. And same for Circle of Karma. And I kind of wanted to speak a little bit about it because it really is about women and about agency. So I just wanted to ask you, do you feel that, because this book was mainly about, I think, women in the 50s and 60s, do you feel that that sense of has the place of women changed in our society now compared to then? Do we have more agency as females now?
I think it has changed. I think it has changed a lot, and I I wanted to really write a story about women, for women actually, and the what I feel the biggest change that has come for women is through the two things that was introduced to Bhutan, and that was first the healthcare, because until then, until the healthcare, I think it was very, very fortunate that the government considered these two social aspects of our society as the mainstays of our development. They invested a lot in that, bringing healthcare and education. Okay? And until this health was accessible to women, to all, but especially to women, especially with family planning, I think it was the biggest change maker. Before that, women were just the baby producing factories, and each time women became pregnant, there was of course, there was happiness that you were that you were going to have another baby, but it was also the time when women said that our lives had been halved. That means there was no guarantee because maternal mortality was so high. And then suddenly having access to family planning methods, I think it really changed. And women said, now look, we are in control of our own bodies. We can plan our lives. That was a big thing. And the other thing was education. It slowly opened up. And of course, along with that, the intellectual opening up and connecting with the world and seeing what is happening in the rest of the world, and the physical possibility of people going and traveling the roads that they were. So these were very important things that came together. Health, education, and the roads of connected. Okay, so that showed that women could travel, and that's why I try actually to use the metaphor of the road, where my protagonist is working on the roads. Actually, she was building the roads, and so this was really a little bit of that, and the women could travel on their own, and then go into Nekor. I mean, that was the most harmless thing that they were going for, but it exposed them to other cultures to see what was different. So I think this was something that I tried, and again, I wrote this book in isolation because there was nobody who could read it, critique it for me, telling me what to do, how to improve, and things like this. And when I first showed my first draft to my publisher in Delhi, Urvashi Buttalaya, with Zuban, she read it and she said, look, Kunzang, if you're writing a book about women and their suffering and how they just sink into their conditions, then it's not so a thing. But please think about it as an uplifting thing that women can make their own choices. Okay, and that was a piece of advice that she gave me. That's very important. So my protagonist doesn't live in, she doesn't accept the situation. She didn't want all these injustices and this, how to say, these, all the unpleasant things that were imposed on her, that she doesn't live under, saying that this is my lair and I'm going to take it. This is my karmic burden. I'm going to live with it. No, she makes a choice. I mean, the choice was to get out of the situation, not even knowing where, for instance, where Kalimpong was, for instance. She just goes there and she finds her way. And then I didn't want her to become a great material success and she becomes somebody, that's talked about, but also the spiritual release where she forgives. I mean, she's not holding vengeance. She doesn't want to take revenge, but she accepts everything. And I think that is, for me, in a way, true Buddhism, when you begin to accept your conditions, but be above it, be conscious about it, and not be, because women always say, oh, I'm suffering so much, but what to do? I'm born a woman. And no, she's happy in what she has decided. She's forgiven the person who made her go into this, her ex-husband. She forgives him and can laugh about their old relationship and things like this. And I think the people who read the book with not just to, I think the many Bhutanese readers were saying, was I in the book? Was I mentioned? Was my relative mentioned? They were looking for these, and some are looking for typos, which was very nice. But I think the best feedback I got and the best discussions I had was when this book was translated into French, and I had my launch in France, and I had a lot of people coming to talk about it. And this was really a time for me also not to say, oh, I wrote it, it's about a woman in Bhutan, but a little bit discuss on the status quo of the, our gender outlooks, to talk about different things. And, the more you talk about your ideas, the more ideas you get back. And that was really, for me, it was a very rewarding and uplifting kind of a moment when I could talk with different people. And so this was a big experience. They didn't tell me what do you eat, what do you wear, but really everyone had read the book, who came to interview me, and that we could have long discussions on the book.
I also really loved the discussion on karma, which I think Holly Gailey, she wrote an article actually on the circle of karma, but looking really much at the gender issues and sort of gender norms. And I loved what she said about karma, in the sense in which you've already also alluded to, which is the sense that you don't just say, what to do, this is just karma, accept my position, but to really turn that around its head and change the definition of life. Of course, given the limited framework where Tsomo, the protagonist, in the end, as you say, forgives, but also goes on to have this comes full circle by embracing her spirituality, and really, I feel like the definition of karma really changed for me as well when I read this book, because she does become an agent of change in the end, of course, in her own framework for time, but she does have agency in the end. Thank you. I think now we'll just talk about craft, La, because we've all your books, but I just wanted to ask you just some really simple questions about sort of your routine and how you go about writing every day, and if you had some tips for our young writers.
Yes. Actually, I'm a very bad example as a writer, because I think one of the most important things you need is to have discipline to write. And I always tell people and students who come to talk to me, have discipline, but I have not much myself. And as long as you can say, I'm taking, at least 2 hours or this much time to write, and you just sit and do your thing, I think that's very, very important. And you have to be able to have a room with your own. Nola, I think that's very, very important. And what I also find is that many young people, they quickly write a story or a draft and say, publish it, because with our publishing enterprise, we found a lot of people, and then you give them feedback and say, look, this should be like this, maybe that should be like this. It's write. I always say, write shorter sentences that you understand, sentences that you come out from your own, and they take offense, because I think the thing is that writing as a creative activity has not been really fully taught in the schools. I think they do their assignments, they can write their history, they can write everything. They can do their maths and their science, but writing as a craft, writing as a subject, as creative thinking writing has not been taught. So it's very difficult. And what I find is also that I think the people think that writing is something that comes to you naturally. No, you have to work on it. You know that yourself also, that you really have to work on it. You have to improve. And I always give the analogy of making a beautiful flower garden. And you can't have your flower garden if you're not weeding and even sometimes you have to throw out flowers because they are shading some other. So it's the same with words. It's not just a play of words throwing there, but really arranging them to give the best effect. Does it express yourself the most? And so this during the lockdown, or it was in between the first lockdown, the second lockdown, the children were still the children in the village were still not in school, trying to learn digitally, but it was not, they were just doing their assignments. So what I did was had children to keep a journal. The children who are going to school, every week we met once, and each one wrote something. And it's just so difficult for them to write what they feel. They were just taking sentences from here, there, and even going to the extent of, making it good by copying things out of things. And now this is still completely missing in our education system. I think creative writing has to be taught. Appreciation for reading and writing has to be taught, I think. And it's something that you really, as you use the word craft, even a handcraft. But this is the hand as well as the head, so you have to really work on it. And there are lots of children who have the potential to write. I can see it, this feeling in it. And some who will never enjoy writing in their writing. So for me, it was also something that I learned. I've never been to writing classes. And it was a very, as I have said many times, that writing my books, The Circle of Karma, and all, was very, very lonely experience because I wrote myself. I had no circle of colleagues or friends who would read it and critique it, except my own family. And I think what you need is to have really environment where there are a lot of like-minded people that you can read, critique, and be quite harsh also. I would have loved it if somebody said, look, what you're writing is completely wrong. I think Bhutanese society is such that we don't like to hurt people, knowingly, unknowingly. So if you write something rubbish and things like this, instead of saying, look, this is completely rubbish, why don't you rethink or something like this? They're always saying, okay, you're doing well, it's good for publication, give it, and things like, give it for publication, this will be a big seller and all things like that. I think this is wrong. I think we have to be harsh. We have to be, how to say, creative critique, or what do you call that? What's the word for?
Constructive.
Yeah, constructive critique. And I was 2 years ago, I was at the 3 years ago, I was at the Jaipur Literary Festival, and exactly sitting in on some of the processes of how they craft a story. And Jan Mantel, the one who wrote Life of the Pi, it's amazing what they do. I mean, he's just almost eccentric how he will put out words in the room, fill up and things like this. I didn't have to go to do that, but I really worked till to a point when I say, I cannot look at this work again, put it away for a while. And with my book on the food, my editor was very, very strong critique. And she, the book was delayed for several years because she was such a strong critique. And yet I valued her critique. We finally changed the editor. I didn't, but the publisher changed the editor because it was never going to come. What she said is just put it away, forget it for a while, and come back to it. And that's what I did. And but I really valued it because it offered you a new perspective. And she, as an outsider, she felt that I was exposing Bhutan too much by writing about the spirits and writing about disbeliefs and things like that. So you get that's what we need, and here we don't have. I know that there is Bhutan Writers Association. I've never been to any of their meetings. I know some of the people who are working there. I don't know what they do, but I think groups like this could help each other a lot, right? And I think there are some informal writing groups, and if they are really serious, they could really help each other. And I think that's what we need, because otherwise, you want to publish, you want to have everything in print just because that's what you think, and you have to improve it. It's really, you have to give it the best. I mean, you know it, how you have to really work, and sometimes, for instance, I'm trying to write of my childhood and growing up in Tang Bum. It's taking me years because I really have to think also about the reality in which you live. Some of the people I write about are still living. Do I have to get permission from everybody to write about it? Some of the historical things that is this is just one understanding. Should I be including all the different understandings? How can it be factual as well as your own perception? So that's why it's taking me very, very long time. But that's I hope in the next few years I can come up with something which is very personal. It's I think it's much more easy in a way to write fiction. Then you can just move your characters around and eliminate this and bring in new. But if you're writing about your life, then you can't do that. I mean, you have to respect everybody who comes in whichever form they come in, whether they come as negative characters or positive characters. You still have to be true to them. Yeah.
So thank you so much.
So I hope So I hope at a later stage I can be able to show it to certain people and get some feedback. Just now I'm still struggling through the stories.
Les. Thank you so much for that, because I mean, I've taken so much out of what you said. I loved the metaphor. It's a beautiful metaphor about writing being like a garden where you have to remove the weeds, and sometimes also, as we say, kill your darlings, which is some of your beautiful friends as well.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think we need to keep in mind, as you said, constructive criticism is very important to writing. And if you can, to have some sort of writing group where you could work through your work and not to rush at the end, but also be very sensitive when you're writing about certain, I guess, factual aspects of history, but also people, because we are a very small community, so we have to be also sensitive. Thank you so much for that. I think we have time for one more question, which is what is the plan for the future, as far as publishing books? Are there any upcoming books that you'd like to share with us?
Yes, I have actually 2 of my books ready since quite some time, and they are already actually with printers, but with the uncertainty with the COVID situation, we are still waiting to finalize it. And I do my printing actually in Delhi. So now the big worry is I've got all the documentation from here, and whether it will be possible to bring it in easily or not. It's again story, a little bit about like Dawa, but it's called Monk Chasing Monkey. It's a small novel, and it's really about everyone talking about meditation and the monkey mind and things like this. So I'm building a story. I built a story on that, about a monk that is in a very isolated place and kind of disconnected from the rest of Bhutan and what has happened in Bhutan. So one day he hears a modern song, and then how his mind, which was quite at ease and quite tranquil, is completely disturbed. So he wants to go and find out the source and the meaning of the song. So he travels to 20 districts of Bhutan, and in each district he has a different encounter, and that he does following his monkey mind, of course, guided by his teacher, because otherwise he would just get lost. But he always is brought back, and finally, what he chooses to be. But the things that he encounters are the youth in youth in Thimphu. He has a small um, experience in the parliament, for instance, and when they are having some very important discussions, he's really shocked, and why everybody's not talking to each other, but everybody talking into little little handies and gadgets and things like this, and how he travels and goes and does what different he attends. And again, I try to bring in some of the historical uh, how to say, the locations of temples, the meaning, and not the meanings, but how things happen. So it's his travel around the country as somebody who is just a ragged monk who has never been to school, has never met many people, but it's him, and how eventually, after this experience, how he is able to control his monkey mind, and that he also, again, he achieves that. The second one is again an illustrated story. The story was written by me, but illustrated by my son-in-law, Clinton, because we've had a lot of joint projects, and it's, as I said, it's about. It was the story was built around my granddaughter's interest in mermaids. So I was trying to tell her through this story that we also have our own story. Chomin, they're called the queens, no? So Chomin, and the stories you write is influenced by what other people tell you. And my daughter was saying, I don't want. If you're writing a story about a mermaid, I don't want a mermaid who falls in love with the human prince and is at his, I can call, she has to be a free-thinking. So all these kind of ideas came in. So I have that ready. It's called Ashitsomen, the Mermaid Princess. So it's our beliefs about what lives under the ground, and that it's not always a fish, but it's a snake, for instance. So that's waiting. It should be coming as soon as things get a little clearer with bringing in things that these should be. So these are the two books that I have finished within the uncertain lockdown era.
Yes. Thank you so much. We will, this has been just a wonderful discussion at so many levels, and I really appreciate your time and effort. And for people who are listening and viewing this, Kunzang's books, Monk Chasing Monkey and Ajit Homin, The Mermaid Princess, will be out very soon.
I hope so.
Also, please continue to check on our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, for more of these discussions. It's called Drukyul's Digital Salon. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonam.